Hello, everyone. I'm Steve Nadell, the Executive Director of ACEEE, and I welcome you to our 14th Hot Water Forum. Hard to believe how time has flown over 14 years. Over the next few days, you will have a chance to take part in over 20 concurrent sessions, 2 plenary panels, and the forum favorite, the Shameless Commerce Networking event. I think, as many of you know, ACEEE is a nonprofit research, education, and policy organization. We've been around for more than 40 years. I'm going to share just one slide with you to put some of our work in context. And give me a second while I pull that one up. There. Okay. So this is a chart from our halfway there study showing how the U.S. can use energy efficiency to get halfway to decarbonization goals. Water heating is in multiple areas. We have appliances and equipment, the purple shown there. It's part of getting to zero energy for new construction, and a lot of the system improvements are part of the building improvements, the dark blue. So hot water is an important part of helping to get halfway there. And we have lots to talk about over the next 3 days on this. And let me stop sharing. There we go. So we have a few notes before we start. First and foremost, thank you to all our sponsors and ally members for their generous support of the Hot Water Forum. Their support allows us to keep costs relatively low for the participants, particularly to our 2 platinum sponsors, but to everyone else. I'd also note that in this Socio platform, you can use the menu on the left-hand side of your screen to optimize your experience and get the most from your attendance. I would note that all presentations will be available for on-demand viewing to registered attendees on the Socio platform within a few days and will remain available for viewing until May. Presenter slides can also be found on their page in the program participants section. And there are bios already posted, so we will not do long bios here. With that, I wanted to introduce 2 of the major sponsors of the Hot Water Forum, Karen Meyer, who's the Vice President of Rheem Manufacturing Company, and Joshua Green, who's the Vice President of A.O. Smith, and they will also be welcoming you. So with that, Karen, take it away.
Hello, everyone. Can you see my slides? I'm going to take that as a yes. So I would also like to thank everyone for attending and coming and attending the 2022 Hot Water Forum. Thank you, Steve, and for all of the participants. Rheem is once again very pleased to be a platinum co-sponsor of this.
Excuse me, Karen.
Yep.
We can't see your slides. I'm sorry. They're not showing.
Can't? Okay. Let's try this again. How about now?
Still can't see them. I'm sorry.
Can you see them now? Oops.
No, not yet.
We had this all worked out, Rebecca. It's not letting me share.
Karen, email me your slides. We'll let Josh go first, and
Okay.
and I'll present the screen. Thanks.
Okay.
Josh, you're on.
Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, where you may be. Josh Green here with A.O. Smith, and we always look forward to the Hot Water Forum every single year. And along those lines, we like to welcome you once again. We are very excited, however, as you saw in the promo, to be with you next year in California. Which will be a change, welcome change from our weather, and certainly as we move through the pandemic. But again, as Steve has referenced, there's a lot of activity going on at the Hot Water Forum this year. We always look forward to this event every single year. We kind of mark our calendars at A.O. Smith relating to it. And along those lines, we're looking forward to lots of programming. The forum schedule looks tremendous. Lots of issues to discuss, obviously, and across these 3 days. And we hope to be joining you, me and my colleagues that are participating in the forum. And as always, we like to thank ACEEE for its longstanding partnership and offering not only this forum, but all of the programming and the resources that ACEEE provides to our industry. Along those lines, we'd also like to take a couple of minutes, really, I'll cut that in half. I want to make sure that we're on time and being efficient, just to reference 2 items as we move forward. One of the themes last forum, and again, this forum, certainly relates to the topic of building decarbonization. Along those lines at A.O. Smith, and certainly amongst our industry, we are moving forward with policymakers, regulators, our friends in the NGO community, including ACEEE, on pragmatic pathways and solutions to help decarbonize the built environment. A.O. Smith has a public position in this regard relating to pragmatic building decarbonization pathways. And I would ask our participants and our registrants to visit our website, aosmith.com/decarbonization, where you can download a white paper that we published last fall relating to this topic. Lot in there, but at the end of the day, we need to have as many solutions as possible. Pathways need to be pragmatic. We have to be thinking both about heat pump technology, but also high efficiency gas for certain applications around the country. And we're looking forward to a continuing dialogue as we move forward relating to building decarbonization, as Steve referenced in his chart. However, the pathway is not easy. There are going to be some challenges, some barriers, and certainly as we as industry, but also as broader stakeholders, it's going to be very important for us to work together collectively to address those challenges and barriers. And again, A.O. Smith looks forward to working with you. We also look forward to working with ACEEE, and welcome. We hope to have a great forum. And with that, hopefully we can send it back to my peer, Karen Myers at REAM.
Hi again, everyone. Rebecca, hopefully you have the slides and you can start sharing them. You'd think after 2 years we'd have this all figured out.
I'm sorry, Karen. I'm having a hard time opening them too. Sorry. I'll keep trying.
Yeah, for the sake of time, I can just walk through this without any slides, which if we get them up, then we'll pop them on the screen. But I also want to thank everyone for attending and let you know that REAM is very happy to be the Platinum co-sponsor again, along with A.O. Smith, on this very important event that really focuses on delivering hot water in many, many applications and in a healthy, safe, and efficient way, and lately through a lot of innovative technologies alike. There are really three major market trends that you're going to hear about over the next 3 days. The first one is decarbonization, then technology, and then the consumer. So decarbonization, that's something we've all been hearing a lot about, and it's certainly affecting the water heating business as well. Heat pumps are the fastest growing product segment that we have, but currently it's a very de minimis part of the market. But we see that portion growing significantly between now and the end of the decade. Regulations are going to drive a lot of this growth. Currently, we have 18 states with decarbonization policies, and we know that DOE has begun the next round of minimum efficiency standards for consumer water heaters. So everyone is wanting to move to highly efficient products that don't use gas, but how you do that and the timing is very, very critical. So, and it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. There's different types of residential and commercial water heaters, and a fun fact is that that at REAM we make over 5,000 variants of very many different water heaters. So that's how complex the water heating world is, and it's only going to get more so. The second big emerging trend is technology, more devices that talk to each other at home. We expect the compounded annual growth rate of connected appliance to grow significantly between now and 2030. So the ease of connectivity is very, very important. Another fun fact for you is that by the end of next year, there will be 14.7 billion connections of products that talk to each other. And there's a lot of benefits for the consumer, for the utilities as well. And there's many regulations that are driving what that connectivity looks like. That's why at REAM and really a lot of people that are attending this forum are very, very involved in writing the standard for AHRI 1430. That will be the gold standard for connected water heaters. And it's not just OEMs, but we have utilities and DOE and others that are participating in this important standard writing process today. And finally, I want to talk about consumers. Consumers, we're seeing more and more end user involved in the purchase process than ever before. We believe that COVID really supercharged that event for water heater products. Another fun fact on this one is that one estimate is that the e-commerce growth jumped 5 years from where it was predicted to be because of COVID. So we see that as a good thing, because when consumers are involved in the purchasing process, they tend to dive a little bit deeper into what they want. And so more consumer involvement is actually resulting in a greater incidence of proactive replacement. So that's a good thing. And we hope that this continues and is not just, and it doesn't go back to the way it was in the pre-COVID years. So again, those are your three takeaways. The heat pump water heater market is about to take off. Connected products are going to continue to grow. We need to be very, very smart about the regulatory approach to ensure that we can balance availability of heat pumps and connected products, and that COVID-19 behavior changes could actually have been a positive in this industry as consumers have more and more involvement in the purchase process. So that's it for me. Again, thanks for attending. I'll be back with you on Wednesday and with Josh to talk about sustainability with hopefully slides that will work. So enjoy the forum, and I will now turn it over to George.
Hi, everybody. My name is George Chapman. I'm an Associate Director at Energy Solutions. I'm also on the steering committee for the ACEEE Hot Water Forum for about almost going on 10 years now. So I'm really looking forward to a great plenary session today. We've got 4 tremendous speakers who are going to give some interesting and different perspectives regarding decarbonization. We talk about energy efficiency, but there's been a real trend in the industry and these types of forums to really start thinking about decarbonization as the objective. And when we start thinking about decarbonization, it means that we might kind of question some of the historic ways we've been talking about hot water efficiency, the use of hot water, how the products relate to one another, and different opportunities to advance decarbonization that might not look exactly the same as they have in the past. So we're going to have our 4 presenters up here on the screen just so I can say hi to them. And then we'll have very quick presentations, probably with slides, hopefully, or not. Fingers crossed for our great presenters, and then we'll have a real discussion, moderated discussion. It's going to be a lot of them and very little of me, which anyone who knows me will be grateful for. So I will just take 1 second to introduce the group. We'll start with Abby Dakin from EPA Energy Star. Many of you know Abby. All of the bios are available for you to look at, so it prevents me from reading them, but I encourage you to do so. Following will be Claire Miziolek. She's a colleague of mine at Energy Solutions, but she'll actually be speaking to a previous role that she had doing the Massachusetts Decarbonization Roadmap, and she'll tell you a little bit about what exactly that means. Following Claire will be Mike Sokol from the California Energy Commission, providing a California perspective on this decarbonization topic, and that will be followed by Helen Walter Terranoni from AHRI, and she'll be providing sort of an industry perspective on all of this. After those quick presentations, we'll all get together and we'll talk a little bit about some of the topics that have kind of come up through those presentations. I think it's going to be a great session. Really looking forward to everybody. And I think with that, we'll just hand it over here to Abby and we'll look forward to getting at it. All right. Thank you.
It looks like magically my slides did make it onto the screen. So good luck for us. So I'm starting here. This is following Karen's mention of the states that have decarbonization policies. Here they are. And I'm starting here because this is what is driving Energy Star to take decarbonization into account. We have always partnered with states, utilities, localities, as well as manufacturers and retailers and building owners to bring efficiency as well as environmental sustainability to many product categories, including water heating. And now that decarbonization is in the mix, there are really 3 places where it's showing up. It's showing up in our specifications, along with our usual energy and cost savings and consumer payback targets. And it shows up both in what we decide to work on and in crafting the criteria that we end up with. That has been very evident in the water heating world, as I'm sure you all know. We finished a version 4 specification for water heaters early this year. We're now deep in the weeds on version 5 for water heaters, and as well as adding connected criteria. In marketing and communications, we are focusing efforts, offering focused efforts with a high potential to encourage decarbonization, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And so those are available for those of our partners and collaborators where that's a goal they want to pursue. And thirdly, we've been pursuing all of this in a highly collaborative fashion. We've been working closely with our colleagues in the federal family. We've also been working closely, and I'll just highlight that we too are involved with the HRI 1430 technical specification for demand flexible water heaters. And this is really a case of everybody pulling together. NRDC and California Energy Commission took the first step. NEA took it up and pulled it a little bit further. We picked it up and are pulling it a little further. Now it's AHRI's turn to put their shoulder to the wheel And it's really been a collaborative effort that is helping all of our work be more effective. So as an example of what I mean for marketing and communications, I'll just talk for a moment about the Energy Star Home upgrade, which you may have heard of. It's something that our Administrator Michael Regan has in the Building Decarbonization Summit last year. Also something Secretary Granholm at the Department of Energy has mentioned. It's really it's a marketing platform more than anything. It's a self-service package of high impact home improvements that people can take on as it makes sense in their home and for their circumstance. It also can serve as a platform to coordinate and collaborate with states that are interested in decarbonization or states that are just interested in energy efficiency, as well as with utilities. The measures here are, in fact, focused on building decarbonization, both efficiency and in many cases electrification, for instance, of vehicles. And we look forward to working with collaborators on this and other efforts around Energy Star marketing. And I'll just note, this doesn't mean we have given up on our usual menu of our guiding principles around the Energy Star mark. The Energy Star mark still means no sacrifice in performance. It still means cost effectiveness for consumers. And so the decarbonization is an added thought that we have to stay, as we have been, a partner in moving the ball forward. So with that, I will stop and pass it off to the next panelist.
Great. Thank you, Abby. And hopefully my slides are there. They are. Awesome. Great. I'm going to jump right in. So touching upon themes that are already mentioned, I'm here to speak on findings from a deep decarbonization study that I managed in Massachusetts. I'll be showing and speaking to the results of this long-range, economy-wide, 6-report deep, painstaking process, which looked at how to equitably transition our economy. And the premise of the effort was that in 2050, we had successfully achieved our net zero greenhouse gas emissions goals, where we only emit as much as we take back in through carbon sequestration. Through the study, we tried to turn over every stone. We analyzed 8 scenarios. We tried to establish the common threads, no regrets elements across what added up to millions of decisions, and trying to make space for breakthroughs that could pop up over the next 30 years. So the goal, why we were going after net zero, as many other states have done, it was established by the IPCC as the mid-century goal, and then by the Massachusetts legislature and the Global Warming Solutions Act, then by Governor Baker, and then by the Mass legislature again. So if you want to dive in more, please do. The link there, it's mass.gov/2050 roadmap. There's a lot of information there. I'd be very happy to have you read it. But on the right here, we have one of the outputs from the roadmap effort. It shows the state's final energy demand. And on the left is a reference case. And on the right, in that scenario, we achieve net zero with what we called an all options on the table. So that give us a baseline least cost way to decarbonize without adding specific constraints. And we iterated off of that all options scenario. So as you can see in the reference case and in 2020, in both cases, we are an economy powered by fossil fuels. So we have a lot of natural gas, gasoline, and other liquid fuels, and electricity is a large portion in that left reference case scenario. But even though the Massachusetts economy is incredibly clean, the mass grid, according to ISO New England last night, we're still 41% natural gas powered. But by 2050, assuming we are successful at achieving net zero emissions, and that's this right-hand case scenario, we will change to be a majority electric economy. And there will be small pockets of remaining fossil fuels, but all told, will actually use a lot less energy, about 40% less, as an economy as a whole as we do today. And that's mostly because of inherent efficiency improvements in electric equipment. So if you think about moving from a pretty inefficient internal combustion engine to an inherently efficient EV, that represents a huge drop in total vehicle energy use. Same idea of moving from a gas furnace or a fuel oil boiler to a high efficiency cold climate heat pump for space conditioning. So think about, an 80% efficient versus a COP of 2.5. It's just a big jump. So if you look at that yellow pipeline gas wedge at the bottom, on the far right, the wedge persists into 2050, but is used almost exclusively to essentially turn existing gas power plants into peakers. So natural gas shifts in how we use it to become a balancing resource for the grid, no longer really distributed for daily use in most cases. So as you can imagine, the electric grid makes huge changes kind of in the background of this graphic. And over the next 10 years, shifts away from natural gas and towards renewables and imports of hydro. And renewable energy production really takes off in the 2030s and 2040s to more than double the current electricity production generation. So what does this mean for water heating? On the left, I've just put a pie chart of the national, from EPA, the national greenhouse gas emissions in 2019, which look markedly different than Massachusetts because industry and agriculture are a much smaller slice of the Massachusetts pie. But the emissions of buildings, you can see commercial and residential at 6% and 7%. There provides a little bit of context for this picture. So with transportation electrifying in a big way, and as I mentioned, the grid becoming almost non-emitting, over time, the building sector will become a more important, it will grow in its importance for emissions, but it's still a relatively modest slice of the full emissions pie. So when we move from this full economy big picture transition and dive into what the study found on water heating, that's on the right here with residential on top and commercial on the bottom, we found that we need to start making immediate shifts in sales towards heat pump water heaters and electric resistance and away from gas, especially in residential spaces. In order to do so, that's really to sufficiently transition the full stock of equipment by 2050. And the least expensive time to decarbonize is when the stock is naturally turning over. When you're already investing in a new product, the incremental cost of going to a decarbonized option is much smaller at that time than if you just installed a water heater, 3 or 4 years ago and you're replacing it outright. In the end of the day, we found a pretty even split between electric resistance and heat pump water heaters. We also, in the study, found allowed 25% of water heaters to be load flexible, which we allowed to have a 2-hour delay or advance. And when we allowed 50% of water heaters to be load flexible, we actually found that the full system costs were even lower cost. It was an even cheaper scenario in that case. So by 2050, you can see up at the top, there was almost no gas used by residential water heaters and only a very small amount left for commercial. So really, at the end of the day, what our study found, which I think was surprising, is that there's a significant amount of load flexible and electric resistance water heaters that can fit into a large scale decarbonization picture. We're making an economy-wide transition, and we know that the electric grid, in order to achieve these goals, has to make a significant change from today. So I wanted to share this with you. I look forward to the conversation. Similar studies have found a slightly different mix here, but a lot of the trend lines are in the same direction. So with that, this is kind of where we need to go, and we need to work together to get there. And thank you. And I'll pass it over to Mike to give kind of a live version of a state's perspective.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Claire, and good afternoon or good morning, depending upon where you are. I'm Michael Sokol, the Deputy Director of the Efficiency Division at the California Energy Commission, speaking on behalf of California over here on the West Coast. And really just thank you for the opportunity to join this fantastic panel. A lot of really good perspectives and expert opinions here, and happy to be a part of it. I do not have slides, but I have a lot to say, so I will try to be quick in my comments and look forward to the discussion. But a quick intro to the Energy Commission. We are California's agency leading the charge to 100% clean energy future for California. That's through a variety of mechanisms, renewable energy with the RPS standard. We've got siting for thermal power plants. We've got an extensive fuels and transportation division. We do a number of assessments, extensive research, and where I work is in the efficiency division, where we oversee standards, planning, policy, and analysis for buildings and appliances with efficiency at our core, but increasingly getting into decarbonization topics. I've worked here at the CEC for over 12 years with a number of different focus areas, including many in the portfolio I just touched on, but increasingly in recent years have been able to focus more on decarbonization and equity, which are integrated related. And I'll talk more about that later on. In California, we do have ambitious plans to decarbonize the entire state's economy with sort of thresholds and milestones leading up to 2045. And currently, roughly 25% of the GHG emissions come from residential and commercial buildings. And it depends on the specifics of how you account for that, but let's use that as a ballpark number. As I mentioned, in the efficiency division, we focus on both new and existing buildings, but also appliances through statewide standards, policy and planning efforts, data and analytics, you name it. If it touches efficiency, buildings, or appliances, we have a role to play here in California. But we do work very closely with a number of other agencies, including the California Air Resources Board, the Public Utilities Commission, housing agencies, and others, to make sure that we have policies and plans that balance the numerous needs of California residents. The backdrop of the work and the reason why I'm here is California completed a number of activities, but recently last year, an assessment focused on what it would take to reduce building GHG emissions 40% below 1990 levels by 2030. And the findings were there are a range of strategies that are going to be necessary to achieve these GHG reductions and set the stage for the broader economy-wide decarbonization, starting with efficient electrification of end uses as they're cost-effective, as they make sense, continuing to focus on gas and electric efficiency, accelerating the shift to zero carbon generation and renewable energy, focusing on load flexibility so that the time of demand matters from a GHG reduction standpoint, and supporting that transition by making sure that low GHG refrigerants are available to serve those particular needs. The most significant GHG benefits that we found comes from a shift to heat pumps as the preferred technology for space and water heating. And also, it's important that we make sure, and we have an eye on making sure those systems are able to respond to periods of high renewable availability and low electricity prices, really with an eye towards reducing GHG emissions. And right now in California, we are at an inflection point that supports this large shift towards heat pumps as the preferred technology. The recent Integrated Energy Policy Report that we published actually last month established or recommends establishing a target for deploying at least 6 million heat pumps in California by 2030 in support of the GHG reduction goals. We know this is a floor, and likely looking beyond 2030, we'll need to go well above and beyond this number. But for context, we're at roughly 600,000 today in California, and less than 100,000 of those are on the water heater side. So there's a long way to go to do this, and there's significant transformation necessary for the whole stream of stakeholders here. The builders, the installers and contractors, distributors, end users, so many different touch points that we were really looking at a rapid market transformation here. There's been a lot of recent progress made on the new construction front in a variety of ways. But starting with the 2022 Building Energy Efficiency Standards that were just adopted late last year by the CEC, for new residential buildings now require at least one heat pump for space or water heating as the standard design, and also include electric-ready requirements for new buildings that do include gas. Building standards for new construction have evolved far beyond the zero net energy framework in recent years to more of a GHG reduction focus as it aligns with efficiency saving goals and the strict cost effectiveness requirements of our standards. As I mentioned, we're working closely with other agencies as there's a variety of authorities that come into play when talking about new construction. Existing buildings are an area of key focus moving forward. With 14 million existing residential buildings and a whole lot of commercial space, it's going to be critical for meeting the statewide GHG goals, but it's also much more challenging than new construction in a lot of ways. And a variety of tools and lots of funding will be necessary to make sure we hit those goals. Earlier this year, with that in mind, the governor introduced a budget proposal for roughly $1 billion for equitable building decarbonization. That was introduced in January and now is with the legislature for consideration. And that would include a focus on low to moderate income customers through direct install that contemplates a whole bunch of needs of the users, in addition to a combination of statewide rebates for low carbon building technologies, but also some focus on commercial refrigerant replacement to ensure that low GHG alternatives are made widely available. And if this is approved, this is really just a down payment. We know that many billions more will be necessary to reach the 2030 goals and looking beyond. Older homes with minimal insulation and air gaps and non-existent or low performance space heating and cooling, they're not well equipped to withstand extreme heat and protect occupants. So part of this is making sure that the residents of California are safe as well, and making sure that funding is prioritized for California's most vulnerable residents. Existing building decarbonization requires holistic solutions that include both efficiency improvement at the building level, deployment of new electric efficient technologies for space and water heating, and on-site infrastructure upgrades, such as panel upgrades that are necessary to make those direct energy improvements. Also an importance of focusing on water. CEC also drives water efficiency standards with an understanding that any water saved is an energy and emission savings as well, with significant amount of energy necessary to move water. And as we transition to zero carbon generation and renewables, it's becoming increasingly important to focus on the timing of demand and ensure that appliances and buildings are flexible to reduce the need for peaker plants and fossil generation during times when renewables are not available. California is advancing both load management standards for utilities to facilitate a prices to devices framework, and ensure that standards are developed for appliances to be able to respond to those price signals in a way that benefits customers, supports grid operations, and reduces greenhouse gas emissions. Electric water heaters will be covered under the scope of the flexible demand appliance standards, and CEC staff is moving forward with analysis to inform those eventual standards. So in conclusion, we know many solutions will be necessary to achieve these goals, and technical, policy, outreach and education, funding, and supply chain issues are just scratching the surface. So we're going to need to work together with industry, government, academia, and a broad range of stakeholders to ensure we are collectively able to proceed down this pathway in ways that are beneficial and consider the needs of all, starting with customers and residents. And with that, I will hand over to Helen.
Thank you very much. Hopefully I'll be able to share my slides. We'll see about that. So just wanted to introduce myself, Helen Mulch-Ciaranoni from the Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration Institute. And then maybe just mention firstly, can you see my slides okay? Can everybody see my slides? This industry is certainly very committed to greenhouse gas emissions reductions while promoting sustainable, reliable, and affordable access to essential heating and cooling.
Helen, we cannot see your slides. You need to share your screen.
Is it sharing now?
No. It's the middle button you have to push and share your screen.
Let me, apologies, I will stop and start again. Sorry about that. Okay, I think you can see it now. Okay, great. So as evidenced by that, the industry has committed very deeply to the American Innovation and Manufacturing Act. You just heard some comments around the use of low global warming potential, low GWP refrigerants. That AIM Act is slated to reduce the consumption of HFCs, hydrofluorocarbons, by the equivalent of 5 billion tons of CO2 by 2035. And also, through energy efficiency increases, which are estimated to reduce emissions by 200 million tons of CO2 by 2025. So a significant investment in the future of reduction of greenhouse gases. I would note that in order to enable these transitions, a lot of commitment has been made, especially for heat pumps. Building codes need to be updated in order to allow the use of low GWP heat transfer fluids. And so we were working tirelessly along with our partners to try to move that forward with a lot of gaps, but a lot of work to do in hundreds of jurisdictions. One of the key things that we talk about a lot as an industry is predictability, orderly, sensible transitions, and certainty. And one of the things that we're facing right now is a record-breaking pace of required transitions. So there are transitions required around safety standards and energy efficiency. We see demand response requirements appearing in various regulatory spaces. We heard some discussion around the standard, the AHRI standard that we're all working to finalize around demand response, refrigerants, and even chemicals in various articles. All of those things are kind of happening on top of each other right now. And there's a lot of work to do for each one of these transitions. All of the steps on the right, and maybe some steps that I haven't listed, all have to be completed in order to appropriately transition in any one of these spaces. And when there are multiple transitions required because of multiple regulations, each one of these steps has to be repeated over and over and over again for equipment. And you heard Karen mention earlier, there are the thousands of types of equipment that just one company sells. So you can see there's quite a bit of work for the industry to do, and even just the nationally recognized testing laboratories. The NRTLs are swamped with work around transitions, just testing and approving, listing new products. So certainly our goal at the end of the day, I think it's the goal probably for everybody on this panel to maintain access for folks to hot water of a sufficient temperature to disinfect, and also to reduce the carbon footprint. So how do we work together to make sure that we move forward in that way? I think you heard it. Keep those lines of communication open. There's a need for harmonized policies, maybe some harmonization between some of these transitions so we can lessen that load of testing and retesting equipment. And then, and that kind of encompasses that significant planning needed for all of these transitions. Also, I would just say that, we don't know what we don't know yet. And we need to keep the space open for innovation as these transitions occur. And we need some policies that can adjust for new information as it becomes available. And so those are some of the things that are kind of on my mind as we talk about more transitions for this industry. And with that, I just want to thank you for including me today and providing just my contact information.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Abby. Thank you, Claire. There you are. Thank you, Claire. Okay. Gang's all here. That was great. Thank you so much for providing a really diverse and interesting overview to sort of this decarbonization topic. But hopefully we get to have a little bit of fun now and just have a little bit of a conversation with you all. And I wanted to start with kind of, for this forum, it's kind of an obvious question, but I guess in the larger perspective, maybe it isn't, which is, where does water heating fit in from a decarbonization perspective? Why is water heating important? We saw a couple of slides where it was less than 20, commercial and residential is less than 20% of carbon emissions. There are a lot of things we can be going after. So for this forum, we're obviously going to talk about water heating, but I'm curious from sort of a larger decarbonization nationwide perspective, what's important or what's unique and interesting about water heating? Why does it matter? Claire, get us kicked off.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Thanks, George. So I think water heating is one of a multitude of issues of sources of emissions, and the thing that is really unique to water heating, there's a couple of them. One, they are often emergency replacements, so that makes the ability to figure out the supply chain issues more acute, and the need to kind of get it right so that the water heaters that are being installed are putting us on a pathway to our decarbonization goals. Another is that there's so many of them. They're everywhere. We use them all every day, but people aren't thinking of them front and center. And so there is an opportunity on the load shifting, they're uniquely well suited to help load shifting without any consumer detriment, but let alone consumers even necessarily being aware that the load is being shifted. And the other one, I would just say, for homes and buildings, yes, it's maybe a percentage, a small piece, but we're going after an all of the above and more strategy towards decarbonization. So, next to space heating, which is a regional issue, water heating is kind of the big one to go after. So those are a few of kind of from the roadmap study, those perspectives.
I'll add one thing that from an economy-wide point of view, in addition to agreeing with everything Claire just said, from an economy-wide point of view, it may not be much, but for an individual homeowner who's interested in being part of this transition, 93%, I think, of their on-site fossil fuel use is for space and water heating. That's a national average, of course. Water heating is smaller than space heating, but it's a very significant part. And so to a homeowner who's interested in participating, it's a very important step.
I think that's those are all really good points. And I would just, add from California's perspective, we're looking at decarbonizing the entire economy. And so, of course, you need to sort of identify every source of emissions and come up with a good plan over time to transition. And so with water heating, I think we've seen that heat pump water heaters are now at a point in California that they're cost effective and make a lot of sense. There's one in every home, and we know that these are early opportunities when we look at appliances and flexibility. Water heaters are one of the earliest opportunities that are sort of close to ready to move. And so I think those are just some of the reasons, but also thinking about the fact that, again, there's so much energy embedded in the use of water, and particularly in hot water, that it makes obvious sense as an area of focus.
Well, and I'm surprised that nobody else brought this up based on some of our earlier discussions, but of course, and maybe it's just intuitively obvious, the ability to use that as a storage platform. And so I think that everybody's nodding their head. So thanks for giving me an easy one to add on the discussion on this. But of course, that makes it very interesting, right? It's uniquely positioned to store energy. Maybe with a little bit less visibility to the end user. So certainly that is of interest. And I don't know what else I could add that other folks haven't already mentioned.
I'll just add one more thing. Let's not forget that a water heater is a long life appliance. And so if we want to be decarbonized by 2050, that means we have to stop selling carbon heavy water heaters by 2030, 2035, somewhere in there. So now is the time.
Right. So good. I'm glad this is an important topic. We've justified the rest of the presentation here. So let's let's think about this. Sort of the premise of the plenary here is how we're thinking about water heating from a decarbonization perspective, as opposed to a traditional energy efficiency perspective. What are the types of things that you might approach differently, whether it is something like embodied carbon, whether it is something like refrigerants, whether it is something like, what does an energy code or appliance standard look like if you were seeking to drive a decarbonization objective as opposed to a traditional efficiency objective? How would you build the structure differently? How would you look at the product differently? What are some of the things that are different from a decarbonization lens than maybe a traditional efficiency lens?
I want to jump in and just talk for a second about embodied carbon in water heaters. Many years back, maybe a decade or so ago, EPA did an analysis of many of our product categories looking at life cycle carbon impacts. This was a sort of a top level, kind of a sketch. And the results are exactly what you'd expect. But for a high energy use end use like water heating, the energy in use was far and away the largest impact. And even that was even true for something like a refrigerator, which uses significantly less carbon, includes refrigerants, includes foam blowing agents. While end of life and beginning of life were at that time about a third of the impact of a refrigerator, for a water heater, it wasn't even close. So if we imagine that we are now taking into account the greenhouse gas impacts of including a refrigerant in a heat pump water heater, it will still be dominated by energy efficiency and use.
I'll jump in that on the embodied carbon piece, it's really challenging to have that be front and center as a state level goal. And that's because of the accounting framework for most greenhouse gas inventories that look at emissions within a certain jurisdiction. So something like wastewater treatment related and a source of embodied carbon in some regards for hot water. If that's happening within jurisdictions, sure, those emissions are fair game and need to be reduced according to an inventory. But something like the embodied carbon in steel for a water heater that is from overseas, that would show up in a different inventory, and so would not necessarily be kind of the rise to the top of a very long list of priorities to decarbonize. And so that can be a challenge. It doesn't mean that it's not important. And I think to Abby's point on water heating, it is it's probably still a big number on the embodied carbon, but much dwarfed by the potential emissions from the active use of water heating. So as that changes over time, hopefully that can be in place. But things like reducing emissions from wastewater treatment, it's a significant opportunity and something that I know jurisdictions are trying to make happen.
Well, I would add to that, just starting with the sort of the first piece, which is the nexus with efficiency and decarbonization, and how that sort of would shift the approach. But I will say that, of course, going back to the roots of the Energy Commission, starting in the late 70s, we put standards forth for efficiency as an alternative to building a whole bunch of new power plants, and that's still that value is still there. But the market and the world has evolved to a point where we're in a fortunate position where now the decarbonization circle, there's sort of a Venn diagram with efficiency and decarbonization, and there's some clear sort of overlap. And I would say that water and space heating have been, again, within that same overlapping space at this point now. And so on the new construction side, we have seen a sort of a tipping of the scales to a point where heat pumps make a lot of sense, and focus on heat pump water heaters is really one of those early measures. And I would add that for the embodied carbon discussion, which is a really good one, we're really starting to just get our bearings here in California, and there's lots of discussions across academia and certainly government to figure out how are we talking about the same thing and defining embodied carbon using the same framework. And then second piece is, okay, what do we do about it? Assuming there are gaps in sort of the regulatory framework, what do we do about it to actually address those emissions? So I don't have good answers there, but certainly a hot topic we're paying attention to.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we had some really fun discussions about this before, and it's too bad we didn't tape them, about embodied carbon and some other things. I mean, I think if we think about embodied carbon and kind of that big picture, looking across the world, I'm not sure that it matters so much around where the steel comes from. I think that because somebody else is going to use it, and it just, maybe shipping logically is kind of the first place to start. And of course, even especially now with supply chain issues, like shipping logically is makes probably a lot of sense. But I think, as we think about some of the other issues around refrigerants, and I think it kind of points to the need for a well-trained workforce, making sure that folks are very aware that they need to, collect refrigerants at end of life, and address them appropriately so that they use that reverse supply chain so they get reused properly. They don't go bad just because you used them once. And I think also, I think we have to think about this in the, we haven't said it yet, but, the nation has some very different perspectives around decarbonization. And if we want to collectively get the biggest bang for the buck and reduce the carbon footprint as much as possible, we've got to think about not only the places where people are willing to lean in and maybe do some very new things like California, but also the places where people are maybe leaning out. And so are there things that we can do across the nation, around managing refrigerants better, around trying to get people to adopt more energy efficient equipment more quickly? What are some things that we can do even in those places where maybe this isn't a priority, or maybe there's even a little bit of concern about this direction? So I think, thinking big picture across the nation is going to be really important for people that really want to have the biggest impact long term.
There's one thing we haven't mentioned. Again, can't believe we all missed it. It really does raise up the importance of water heating as a load shifting resource in the electric grid, because the primary helpfulness of that is in order to deal with generation that is less dispatchable than it used to be. So if the load becomes something that you can use to soak up energy when it's available cheaply and cleanly, then it is much easier. And the storage water heaters are an existing energy storage resource. And it's not cheap or easy to get them connected and use them that way, but they are helpfully right out on the fringes, so that while you can install utility scale storage, it makes it much easier to deal with storage. They have very low turnaround loss on the energy that's stored there. And and as we mentioned in the last question, very little impact to the consumer if managed well.
Yeah, I'll just underline that is consistent with what was found in Massachusetts, but also not every storage water heater had to be connected in order to have a value. And I think that's really because the grid is changing so much, is growing so much, and the needs, what we've been thinking about as peak and what the matching of supply and demand for energy, it's going to be a really different system. And that's somewhat invisible right now. A lot of it is a leap of faith that system grows the way it needs to grow, so that we can kind of skate to where the puck is going in that way. But just emphasizing that our traditional mindset around efficiency is a little bit, electrification first, efficiency second, is the decarbonization calculus. At least that's how things penciled out in Massachusetts.
The one thing I'll say about that is, obviously, it's really interesting, Claire, that the study in Massachusetts showed a 50-50 split between electric resistance and heat pump water heaters. That was really interesting. But the fact is that the entire clean energy transition, how much it costs, depends on how much total energy we use. And so there is no getting there without efficiency.
No, I think that's right, Abby. And I just wanted to add, this is one of the things we talked about. Again, I wish we recorded those sessions, George, because I think they were an awful lot of fun. We had a really good conversations, and
We're trying to do that here, Helen.
But you know, one of the things that we talked about in one of the pre-sessions was about how many, you know, how we've had to kind of rethink this transition as we go. And kind of be pretty nimble. You know, at one point, you know, people said, no, go, you know, we don't want tanks. We want people to have instantaneous heating, right? And so industry kind of ran over here and like worked on instantaneous heating. And then folks said, no, we want to have water storage so that we can kind of use this as an energy storage platform. And now we're over here kind of doing this other thing. So I think it's important to just highlight that, like, we're learning collectively through this transition. There's going to be more things that we do need to learn. We're going to make course corrections as we go together. And it's just really important to keep the dialogue open and make sure that we're all kind of thinking together so that, you know, industry has enough time to make these transitions happen. There's a lot of work to do behind the scenes. And you know, Claire, you had talked about, you know, thinking ahead around from a policy perspective to kind of help folks about that in one of our sessions. And but I just wanted to kind of make kind of pull that out.
Yeah,
and I'll say it again, Helen, that I think one of the challenges, you know, in Massachusetts, we have big long-term goals. We have 2030 goals and now 2040 and 2050 goals. But the intermediate strategies and some of the kind of the state level objectives around, you know, the standards or codes that will achieve those goals are it's a much closer time horizon to set those. You know, we're looking a year or 2 years ahead to stay on top of it. And I think, you know, I'm no longer with the state, but I think everyone's trying to do better and trying to have this long-term time horizon. But I think as much as possible, being able to make these longer term commitments. You know, we have this 2030 goal, and right now that means that XYZ, and being able to really rise to that occasion. I'll use the example of electric vehicles, where, you know, this 2035 mark was put in of no more ICE vehicles sold after 2035, and several states following California's lead started to announce this, including Massachusetts. And then suddenly the vehicles manufacturers started to make their own objectives, and in some cases moving the timeline up and really kind of taking ownership of that. Oh, they got the signal and now they can follow suit. And I'm not so worried about the transportation sector because of what has happened there. So I think, how can we similarly kind of lead the way and make these policy objectives really clear and out there, while allowing room for innovation, not so cut and dry, but trying to make sure that we have a long-term horizon, and hopefully that can really mobilize the market in the ways that we know can happen to really drive things forward for the good of us all.
Well, let me add, just to kind of build upon this discussion, and particularly something that Abby said, which you may have heard me use the term a few times, efficient electrification. And so just speaking from the California perspective, you know, it's not electrification for its own sake, right? It's really finding those opportunities where there's both, you know, efficiency first, to make sure that you're right size, you know, efficiency at the building level, efficiency at the system level, to make sure you're right sizing sort of the need of not just for the water heater, but other systems within the building. And that connecting it with my earlier comment on the genesis of the Energy Commission to avoid the need for additional power plants, right sizing the whole system as we're seeing this major transition to electric end uses and vehicle electrification, building electrification in certain pockets, at least, really making sure efficiency is front and center in ways that that are beneficial to consumers, but consider sort of the grid costs and the whole costs to society. And thinking about the load flexibility component of that in the same, it's sort of an evolution of that same framework, right? We want to make sure we're paying attention to the time of consumption, because really it's all about, in the middle of the day, we have in California here a bunch of solar. Hopefully there's some wind in the evenings and in the mornings, but there's going to be that sort of evening ramp that's a major challenge. And the more that we can facilitate flexible, efficient electric appliances, the more we can offset the need for that additional ramping generation.
You know, it's interesting, Helen, you brought up earlier, you made a strong and obviously critical point on regulatory certainty and having a look over the horizon. And what's interesting is the Energy Star program works by continually changing our expectations. That's the engine that drives change, right? And yet, I think in collaborating in things like this, in keeping, what is it we're looking for in 2050 in mind, it gives, without, we can't tell you what our specs will be in 2050, but we're all looking at the same reports. We're all looking at Massachusetts. We're all looking at the Deep Decarbonization Pathways Project. And so it's not like there's no certainty without having some, but I think we're all really trying to look ahead in a way that makes it as easy as possible on the manufacturing community, because it's definitely true that, we'll learn more and then we'll change course and then that will suck. So, and yet it's the only thing we can do, really.
Yeah, no, and I'm not admonishing anybody for changing course. Like, I think it's only sensible to change course. And in fact, I have no idea what the brilliant people in these companies are going to invent tomorrow. And so we need to leave space for changing course. I don't know if somebody's going to come up with some magical fairy dust fuel or, whatever the case may be, right? But we need to leave room for innovation. We need to leave room for new ideas, and we need to leave room to course correct, right? We don't know. We really don't know what we don't know yet. So
I had one other thought. Go ahead, Michael.
I would just say, to add to that theme, so the topic of innovation, I mean, one of the things from the CEC, we set the statewide standards, right? But then there's also some flexibility for local jurisdictions to go above and beyond. And so focusing on minimum efficiency requirements and minimum GHG requirements. And so we really are in a fortunate position of being able to be a leader, but also be an incubator of some of the local government leadership, where they're getting, there's a lot of thought that goes into it. And yes, it needs to cater to the local needs and priorities. But it also informs opportunities for us to go further in future code cycles as well.
I think, Michael, that brings up something that is a very challenging topic for industry. So it can be very, very costly to have little patchworks of different requirements around the country. You heard Karen talk about the 5,000 models. That's just one company, more than 5,000 models, and to have to try to meet a bunch of different requirements around different places. I mean, I think piloting projects in close coordination with kind of the supply chain, to pilot different things. I think I think it's a great way to move things forward. In fact, we're trying to do some pilot work with California and other Climate Alliance states around refrigerant recovery, because it's just not where it needs to be. And we don't know the answer. Nobody in the world knows the answer to this, believe it or not. Best in class, 40% in Australia. That's terrible. So piloting little projects different places, I think it's great to do that in a really coordinated partnership kind of a way. But policies that leave kind of a speckling, it's costly and confusing and doesn't lead to certainty. And then, Michael, maybe that's what you're talking about, is kind of little pilot projects here and there where we all kind of work really closely together.
I think just to respond to that quickly, I mean, we do have an extensive research program in California, not just at the CEC, but in other agencies as well. I mean, well over 100 million a year for different aspects of this. And so the working with local government, piloting, but also in the policy space, where local REACH codes are allowed to go above and beyond the statewide minimum code in a way that's isolated to that jurisdiction, and of course adopted locally, driven by all the local needs and priorities, but making sure there's oversight from the state level to ensure there's they're not sort of backtracking on the statewide efficiency standards.
This has been fabulous. Abby, you had another point you seem to want to make, which I'll invite you to do, and then I think we might transition to the next topic.
Yeah, it's a little bit of an aside anyway, which is I was thinking about the Massachusetts report and some of the other deep decarbonization reports that we've read at EPA. And whenever we read them, we're like, they seem to have overestimated how expensive efficiency is. And then I've talked to folks about renewable fuels. I'm sure you're all completely shocked by that. And the renewable fuels folks will say, all those reports overestimate how expensive renewable fuels are. And I'm sure everybody's saying those reports overestimate how expensive my particular thing that I know the most about is. So maybe the whole transition will be cheaper than we expect.
As someone responsible for determining some of those inputs in these reports, I definitely face this across the board for just about everything. Hydrogen will be cheaper and biofuels will be cheaper. And oh, you think there's only limited biofuel supply? No. Let me tell you, we can do it. We really tried to like order of magnitude change things, and it didn't change the basic results. We looked into these components to really say maybe we're wrong, maybe there is a really huge cost breakthrough, and it still didn't. We still had these kind of common threads aligning, which boiled down pretty simplistically to electrification is a no regret strategy because we need large scale renewables to have a decarbonized 2050 future. So all of the other pieces, it's really shifting around. You know, if hydrogen is more available, great. We'll skirt it to some applications. If biofuels are more available, great. We'll slot them where they belong most. Unfortunately, for homes and businesses where they're really distributed, you know, emissions-based fuels such as pipeline gas just didn't pencil out as being something that that homes kind of could own. There were too many niche applications, aviation and, you know, large commercial and industrial applications where there are no other choices. And so we have to kind of save our emissions for those applications, and homes and businesses where we can easily, you know, pop in a air source heat pump or an electric, you know, connected electric storage water heater or whatever. That was the solution. So, but hopefully to your end, you know, hopefully it all will be cheaper. We ran an entire pipeline gas scenario where we tried to see, you know, yes, what if we kept gas going? And in that scenario, we had a lot more gas water heaters than we did in the all options that I showed. However, the whole system cost was so much more expensive because we had to use all the biofuels for jet fuel because we didn't have any other option to fly our planes. So, so anyway, hopefully it will be cheaper. Hopefully innovation and all of these things come to fruition. But when you tweak the numbers, you know, we tried to make it bulletproof as much as possible. And at least it solved my, like, no, it can't be. It's got to be cheaper to do that. And no, you know, knock it down by an order of magnitude still doesn't change the results.
I am going to transition us now. Thank you. No, Abby, that was a great. I loved every second of that. So let's switch a little bit gears here. We've talked about systems a lot. We've talked about big systems, the electric grid, international trade, refrigerants. I want to think about more like water heating systems or things at that scale here. But how do we think about those types of systems from a decarbonization perspective? What are some differences there? How does that change our viewpoint if we're thinking about these systems from a decarb perspective? You're so eager. Everyone's going to jump in.
George, do you mean equipment, or do you mean? I'm not sure I understand the question.
Sort of water. I mean, water heating systems, like we had talked about, and water systems, and you know the relationship between those things. I know Mike had talked a lot about California's unique perspective given drought conditions, and you know how we think about water in California, for example.
I mean, I'll just say. About the water system in general, it's an area we're certainly focusing on in terms of the energy contributions. We know there's a significant amount of energy that goes into just moving water in the state. So the efficiency and conservation is extremely important, but also the timing of how that water is moved and used and heated within a home is critically important to making sure that we are able to, again, meet that evening ramp and right size the generation and transmission necessary to serve California's end uses. I'm not sure if that directly answers them. Maybe it's again a little too big.
Well, one thing that's nice about the Hot Water Forum Nerd Fest is that there are a lot of ideas around water saving with water heating that are not about the water heater, right? There's water heater distribution within the home or building. And I really haven't put any thought into whether considerations of decarbonization are highly influential there, though I will say that, so I have a friend who is a lead architect, LEED architect, and she keeps asking me here in DC where they're trying to avoid gas in new buildings and deep retrofits. She's like, so what can I do with this multifamily building for hot water? And it was interesting because there you're looking at a system perspective. It's very expensive. There isn't a lot of availability for yet. There will be for central heat pump water heaters for multifamily buildings. Putting a heat pump water heater in each apartment has some issues as well. But then we started thinking about like, okay, well, what if you had one commercial heat pump water heater for 4 apartments? What about instantaneous electric? What about doing something with point of use electric for some end uses, particularly not so much in multifamily, but in commercial buildings? A point of use electric resistance may be an important part of that solution. So yeah, it's not a thing I've put a lot of thought into, honestly, and I wonder if some of the other attendees at the Hot Water Forum have.
I'll just add that on the fixture and kind of end use area, it's a growing trend in state standards to include plumbing efficiency for both cold and hot water fixtures, shower heads, faucets, and there's a growing trend towards that, either adopting California kind of most stringent levels or WaterSense EPA levels. And so we're seeing that across many states to help get at this issue, have the same utility for the end users, but with a less water waste, less hot water waste. So it's definitely, I'm sure many folks will be talking about this more, but it's definitely something to marry in. And while waste, drought conditions were not a big focus of the Massachusetts decarbonization roadmap, general resilience and ensuring that there isn't undue waste is a major focus. So thinking about fixture efficiency in that regard is it works well.
Oh, thank you. And one thing was we talk about the water energy nexus from a decarbonization perspective. It's in a lot of ways, it's the water forum. It's not necessarily just the hot water forum when you are using that lens. And that's something that I think about a lot. So we've got about 13 minutes left. I want to talk about connected. I think this will easily eat up. We saved it for the end, so we didn't spend the entire time on this topic. It's come up a couple of times, obviously. And so we were just talking a little bit about the water heating system, but now we need to think about the energy system as it relates to water heaters and the role connected water heaters can and should play. But also, we've talked about the importance. Also, what can we do? What's necessary to help unlock this potential? And I don't know, Helen, did you want to go first from the HRI perspective? Because we mentioned y'all's spec a couple of times.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we're certainly working as fast as we can go. Abby will tell you we are endlessly meeting trying to get this standard complete. We think it's important. We certainly see different jurisdictions around the country desperate to have this in their hands. So we're certainly trying to work together with all stakeholders to get this across the finish line so that there is a harmonized approach to demand response, harmonized language, even, there's even, just definitional confusion out there. Got a lot of different people coming up with different ways to describe this, and we just kind of need to get on the same page. So, so kudos to all the folks working very, very hard to get that standard across the finish line. And, I think it's very important, that we do move this forward as fast as we can, get it done and have it still be very, very sensible and follow our processes to make sure that proper public review is allowed for.
I'm happy to chime in there just to say that this is a topic that we're looking closely into here in California, with water heaters being one of the flexible demand appliance standards candidates. And, some of the things that Helen mentioned, actually, just starting with the terminology. I mean, we're thinking, demand response is, of course, important, but the broader load flexibility landscape. And so not just the load shift and all the different sort of functions in addition to just the emergency event driven response. And so what does that look like, and how does that align with sort of the regulatory landscape? But then also thinking through things like even making sure that the prices exist from the utilities and the customer is able to actually track down which price I'm on and what that looks like. And it's in a format that is sort of readable by either the appliance itself or some sort of automation service provider that can facilitate that function. It's going to require some level of communication. But really at the core, I think we can look to how do we align that with the availability of generation resources, and really look at opportunities both in the middle of the night or in the middle of the day when there's either lower demand or solar is highly available. And so, but finding ways to ultimately design standards that balance the needs to reduce GHG, support some level of grid operations, and again, right sizing the system, but also be beneficial from a utility bill standpoint to the customer. And so I think that's sort of how we're approaching it at this first cut here in California. And we're learning more about what are each of those different benefit streams and what's the role that any given appliance could play to inform a standard over time.
The other thing I'll mention is technical standards, obviously quite critical, but it's been interesting on the 1430 working group that and also on another working group I'm working on through the Advanced Water Heating Initiative, working on load shift for commercial water heaters, that we can conceive of a lot of things, and the manufacturers are ready to deliver innovation. Give them a year or two to get it together. But the utilities also have to be ready to use it. And there are a few that are way out in front, but it is remarkable how few of them are. And I can give you a really concrete and easy example is around the question of when you need to shift load from a water heater, do you turn it off, or do you, during the time you don't want it to use energy, or do you give it a less extreme grid signal? And the interesting, in the imagination of those of us who are like thinking from a blank page, we're like, oh, well, you don't want to turn it off. You want to have it available, but at a lower, not using as much energy, right? But the thing is that utilities are used to having just load control switches. So in their mind, when they're thinking about shifting load, there are times when it's off and there are times when it can be on. And that's it. And so while we were thinking, oh, off is just when you have an incipient blackout, and they're like, no, off is routine. So it's really it was eye-opening to me that we need to give utilities time as well to change their thinking. And so here again, it's very important for and this is like, none of us know what we're doing, right? We're just making guesses. So it's well-informed guesses, but guesses. So it's really important to allow for innovation and not try to necessarily get like the whole hog immediately. This is definitely a don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, back to Claire's phrase of a no regret strategy. So that's been very interesting.
And I'll just pile on that I agree with everything that's been said. And it's not just utilities, it's the rate structure that they're under and the regulatory structure that there's so much evolution that needs to happen. If you think of the grid in 2050, I didn't show it, but it's completely different than it is right now, at least in Massachusetts. And I hope for much of the country. And all of the needs and signals and, appropriate rate design is going to be completely different. Even if you don't think about buildings, if you just think about vehicles going from loading up, fueling up at the gas station versus plugging in and becoming a regulated load with electricity, that alone, even if you don't touch anything inside the building, will be a huge shift. And so there's a lot of work to do. When I was preparing my response to this, it's if you build it, they will come. I think there's a bit of a hope and a dream. I think our study definitely found the more load shifting available, the better, the cheaper for everyone. But that's in a 30-year time horizon, and it's going to be messy getting there. But thank you for everyone who's invested so much time and energy into helping build this airplane as we're flying it. It's not easy.
No, and maybe if just one more second on this, George, I think one of the things that Abby said, there may be some need for contractor and technician training around some of this, right? And I think that when we think about all the readiness that's needed for this, again, that dialogue, the tent has to be really big so that we include all the right people in this conversation. To make sure that people really are prepared for this. And if we want to go fast, we better get that tent up and get people just to start talking to each other. So I just wanted to mention that as well.
Right. We have like 2 minutes. What I'd love, take 15, 20 seconds and just, was there something that somebody here on the panel said today that really got your head nodding, that you just really were like, oh man, I wish I'd said that? Let me know. I'm curious. I love this question. I'm just curious. What really stuck with you that one of your fellow panelists said?
I'll just quickly say that last discussion on don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, and the need for consistent ongoing learning. I mean, there's so many ideas swirling out there. There's so many needs and opportunities and problems to solve. I think conversations like this and many more at various levels of depth are going to be necessary to make sure we have standards and policies and plans that are workable and meet the needs of everyone involved. But also we're going to have to continue to refine and evolve over time. And so don't expect that we're going to get things perfect on the first cut, but let's get good ideas out there and let's evolve them over time.
And I wrote this down. Helen said it earlier about the record-breaking pace of change and transition that we're facing. And I think just thinking about that in the water heating lens, and then it's everywhere. It's economy-wide. And so that means, just as Michael said, we're not going to be able to get this right because that system doesn't yet have it figured out, and that system's not yet built, but we know we're trending in the right direction. And hopefully once these things land, when we're in 2050, we'll lean back, and a lot of these structures will be actually equitably designed, actually what we want, actually a really great future. Hopefully that's where we land.
I am taking in Helen's point about the looking at the whole country, and that different places are going to need different things, but not in a way that leads to fragmentation, which is hard for manufacturers. That it's important to have states like California and Massachusetts out there at the front leading the way, but that doesn't mean that we can forget about other areas.
And George, I guess I would just say I have really appreciated all of the discussions with this group. It's been very informative. I can't even list just one thing because it's been so many really great things where I agree fully. Michael has said, some just great points, everybody. So, I guess what I would just say is, like, in this last couple seconds, I really appreciate this opportunity. And I think it's critical that we do have everybody that's affected by this or can help with this, all talking to each other consistently to make sure not only do we not know what we don't know, but we also don't know what the other guy knows, that it's just not in our wheelhouse. And so it's really important to kind of have these conversations. And as I think about the folks that are, boots on the ground, putting equipment, installing equipment and so on, bringing them to the table as well for these conversations, but this has just been a really great experience for me. And I really appreciate the opportunity to have been able to talk with all these excellent experts in this space.
And me too. So I'm just going to thank you all. This was a wonderful group. I'm incredibly fortunate to have had the chance to chat with you all on really interesting topics. And I hope everyone else at the forum and attending this plenary enjoyed it as much as I did. I had a great time. I learned a lot. I'm deeply appreciative of all of you. This was a wonderful conversation. And I hope for everybody attending the Hot Water Forum, this is a helpful framing, helpful way to think about the interesting topics that they're going to go into, whether it's a topic about system efficiency, there's several, whether it's about connected, there's several, whether it's how we're going to get programs to evolve, to drive these things. There's going to be a lot of those as well. And so I hope this is a helpful and useful framing and thought-provoking for the rest of what's going to be a tremendous Hot Water Forum. So thank you all so much for being part of this plenary, and so grateful to have a chance to do this with you. And I think with that, we are all set on the plenary, and I can't for the life of me remember whether I'm supposed to just close up shop or kick it over to somebody else.
Thank you very much, George. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks
All right.
all.
Thank you, everybody.
Enjoy Hot Water Forum.
Bye-bye.
Bye.